we'll add the filter between the transaction here and the table. Okay. I could just copy and paste the heading. So let me see if that works. Copy, paste like that. So this one will be the filter part. Let me make it group filter and sort, filter and sort. Okay. For the text, we could bring down this text a bit to like 18, and then we just say filter like that. I think this looks nice. It looks okay. So the next thing we want to add would be we'll add another text. So we'll just add the text here, and we'll say something like type. All right. So I want to maybe filter by type, and the other thing we need to add is inputs. Just add an input like this. For this, we would reduce the height. Before we reduce the height, let's change this to type. And I think this shouldn't be an input. So let's replace it with drop down. So this should be a drop down because we'll be setting up types here. It's going to be a dynamic type, and we are taking the transaction type. The data source is all transaction type. And for the caption here, let's do current options display like that. So for the height, let's bring it down to say 24. Seems a bit tiny, but I think it should be good. And let's group this together. So if we group this, we want to group it into a row container like that, and we'll say group inputs or group drop down like that. That should be okay. For this group, we want to say fit width to content. All right. And what else? This looks okay. For the type here, text, let's add something at the front here. Okay. And then for this, we want to separate or add some spacing between the elements. So let's say we are adding 10 like that. I think that is cool. That's okay for me. All right. Now let's make sure that everything is in the middle. So for this, keep it at the middle. The text, keep it at the middle. And also this, please keep it at the middle so that it looks nice. All right, great. Now we'll just give a general spacing for everything we'll be adding here. So let's come here, add space, and say this is 20, so that the type moves a little bit forward. Okay. So for this filter, we could just add filter by, so that it's not just filter by. I think that looks nicer that way. So after doing this, the next thing we want to do is add a start date and an end date. So the start date and the end date will be used to sort items based on when they were entered into the database. So there will be like a start, maybe start on 1st and to 15. What are those transactions that happen between those days? Okay. So we could just make this group start date, something like that. Group starts date like that, and then here you could just change this to start date, something like that. Start date. And then let's change this element So replace elements with an input, replace place. And then you come down here in the placeholder, you could just say start date. And then here in the content format, it should be a date like this. But we could also choose like a date range to make everything easy for ourselves. If there was like a date range. So if you notice here, there's nothing like a date range. That's why I'm picking a date. And so once we have done this, what else can we do? So a few other things that we could do is to start specifying when the date is going to start, when it's going to end, and all those good stuff. Okay. So this first thing is initial content. For the initial content, I could say that I want it to be like today or a day before. So for example, I can say let's talk about dates. Say current date, something like that. So once you do current date, that's all. It will put today's date there. And then if we say it shouldn't be empty, then it must be checked, something like that. All right. So that is it. I think that's all you really need to know here. Here in the layouts, that's also cool. What we have is already good. So we'll just copy this, copy it and paste it. So copy and paste, and so we change it to end date. End date like that. Then here in the appearance, just want to change here to end date like that. So just very similar. That's what we are doing here. Okay. Like I pointed out, we are picking the date here because that's what we have available for us. But if you ever have, say, for example, a date range, that is a far better one that you want to use. Okay. So we have the input, start date, and all, and that works really cool. All right. So this is cool. Let's go back here and do a refresh. Then I'll show you some other things. So this is nice. We could just come and clear all this and it changes. Okay. But how about if you could get a better UI, say for this date, so that you can just do their selection yourself. Okay. So let's go back and here we want to change this replace this element type. We want to replace it with a date. So here's a date picker. You can use any of these things you are looking here, but what we need is a date stroke time picker. So we pick that and replace it. Don't forget that whenever you want, you can come down here and check any of these elements that works for you. So here is anything about forms. So we are using the date picker now. So there's also like the picture uploader if you ever need it. Okay. So I picked the picture picker by mistake. Okay, so let's pick something else. All right, so here we've replaced it with a date picker, which makes a lot of sense because it presents us with all sort of functionalities. Okay, so for example, here, of course, the initial content we have here would be the current date and time. We will adjust this eventually. Here is the date and time format. We could change it to anything we want, but we'll leave it at this one that we are looking for. Then we could say this the week should start on Monday. You could check this if you want the week to start on Monday, and then display drop down to pick a month or year, something like that. So I could just check this out because check this because I like it. Now, what's the minimum date we want here? So if you are picking a minimum date, say for the start date, you can pick any previous date, but it will not make sense to pick a date that is beyond the current date where we are, right? So here we want the maximum date to not be beyond the date where we are at the moment. Okay, so which will be the current date, right? And that is it. So it will gray out everything that comes after the current date. Okay, so let's also change this one. So we replace elements. We are using date time picker as usual, right? And then you can do the whole formatting. Now for the minimum of this one, the minimum should not be lower than anything that we've chosen there in the start date. Okay, so let me make sure I change this properly to end. So here we'll now say start this value, and we want to add plus day. So we are adding 1 day. So you just put 1, and that is it. So what it means is whatever the value of the start date, you just add 1 to make the minimum of the end date. Okay. Now how about the maximum date? So the maximum date could be something like date. So we want to pick a date. So for example, we could say current day time plus 1, something like that. So that would be the maximum day. So we could do current day, right? And then we want to add 1 day to it. So that makes the maximum date that we can have, right? So I think all this works just fine. Display done. Yes, let's check this out. So this is good. So let's come back here and do a refresh. So we have our drop down here. And now when you click on this, there should be a drop down. Now notice that the cool thing is that it doesn't go beyond today's date, which is 18. Okay. And for this, the only date we have currently is 19. I was not even supposed to give. I'm not supposed to give a. Okay. The minimum is fine, right? So that's correct. So we picked currently it is at 18, which is today's date. And then for the end date, it just adds 1. And so everything is grayed out because the start date, the end date cannot be greater than the current day. Maybe I just add 1, and it cannot be less than the start date. So for us to have more dates here, we need to come here and maybe pick like number 1, which is February 1. And then when you come here, you notice that you now have between February 2 and 19 for your picking. Okay. All right, great. Let's get back here. And the thing we want to do now is to see how we could do the sorting. So let's come back to this table. So here in the table, we initially said that we are getting transactions. We're doing a search for transaction, right? But this time around, we now want to add some filter variables. So for example, we want to get all the transaction that the type of transaction, the transaction type is equivalent to the type drop down. All right. So drop down select. Let me make sure I name this properly. So you need to properly name it so that you'll be able to get it. So let's put filter in front so that we know that this is the drop type for filter. So let's come back here again and redo this. So when transaction is equal to a filter drop down type value. So that is okay. Now let's do it one at a time. One thing we need to specify is that we want to ignore empty constraints. So if you don't ignore this empty constraint, then if there is nothing matching what you give, then it will not show other things that are inside of the database. So make sure we check it. And then let's come back here and do a refresh. So now when we pick on anyone, it should show us only what we have. So you see, the credit is gone because we picked debit. And then when we click on on credit, it shows us only credit. So that's cool. So the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that whatever we're picking is not less than the start date or not greater than the end date if they are selected. All right. So the created date should be equal to the, sorry, not equal to rather. So let's redo what we're doing. Okay. Not equal to, it should be, it should not be less than, or let's just use like this. Let's say it should be equal to or greater than, so equal to or greater than the start date, like this, the value that we get there. Okay. Now, this created dates should not also be greater than the end date. So it should be equal to or less than the end date, the value of that end date. Okay. We are of course ignoring empty constraints here. Okay. So now that we have this, let's do a refresh. And now this will show us all the data that we have in the database. Let's make sure we select 17. I think because I selected the current day. So let's make sure we select 17. So we could choose select 19. So anything between 17 and from 17, which is a day before, something like that, that would just work perfectly for us. Okay. So now that we've selected this, we could now choose okay, only debits. All right. Now I could choose to pick 18, and of course this picks 19 for me. But you notice that we will not have any value because it doesn't match properly. Sorry. Of course I can't even pick what I can pick so that I'll show you that it doesn't work. So let's pick like number 2. That is 2nd of February. I'll maybe pick something around 15. And notice that everything clears up because we don't have any data for those days. Okay. So that's cool.